I do apologise for this. And that is the F word. It's the other elephant in the room. And I completely get, from a commercial perspective, you want to have the minimum number of people that you can have to do the job. But they are linked. Fatigue and depression are closely linked. 75% of all depressors are also fatigued. Should that be a surprise? Probably not. It affects your sleep. However, if you are tired, it increases the probability. And no doubt one of the psychologists will be able to explain why men are 7 times more likely to become depressed in the next year compared with the 3 times per women, 2.5 times. There's a more or less. But if you are fatigued, if you're depressed, you're 4 times more likely to get fatigued. So for the operators, for the post holders, somebody that's depressed becomes a risk because they are also possibly fatigued, which may be that one of your management techniques becomes looking at the rostrum. So, since they are linked, should we be paying more attention to fatigue management? That, to me, is a pretty obvious answer. Flight time limitations are not flight time limitations, they are flight time targets on the commercial side of the house. You do not want people to employ people who can't deliver as much as they can deliver. Why would you do that? And yet, I know a number of people who have gone on to part-time contracts, and every operator has them. Some of it will be for lifestyle, but for some of them, and my brother-in-law has just done the same thing. He runs. He was running a mixture of short and long haul. He's just gone on to a 75% contract because he was tired of being tired. Just because it's legal doesn't mean it's always sensible. So there's a problem there. And there's a model here. You run your computer at 100%, processor at 100%, it will crash. And we run our pilots at 100%. Is there a parallel? Quite probably. I'm not going to comment on this other than to say, because the investigation hasn't happened, but that's the talk that is out there. That's the sort of stuff you see in the press. So some of the community are saying we have a problem with fatigue, the press is starting to pick up on it, and of course the blame game is very easy to start going this way, but some of it may be cultural. I'm not pointing fingers at flying by here, but there are parts of the world where it's quite reasonable to do that sort of thing. I was talking to a colleague last week who was discussing, in fact, it was an Air Force, a Middle Eastern Air Force, where a guy had been running an A330 and he'd done something ridiculous like 200 hours in 10 days. I know, madness. But they'd flown out of the Middle East into Afghanistan, back around somewhere else, back in, and that was the culture, and he was exhausted. Remember this chap? The late Robin Williams. And with our hindsight, we might be able to see that there's a little bit of sadness around the eyes, but only because we know that's what happened to him. You couldn't tell just by looking at him normally. It's not the impression that comes across. And therein lies another of our problems, because you can't see it. And I flew long haul last year with a large operator from the UK, Virgin, with a 777. The flight crew came from Heathrow out of Gatwick. So the flight crew came from Heathrow. They hadn't flown together. The cabin staff director had also come from the Heathrow fleet. She hadn't flown with either of the pilots. She hadn't flown with any of the rear crew, as I asked. And for most of the rear crew, they hadn't flown with each other either. So how the hell are you supposed to know that Jim has a problem with Jim's left part today? You can't. You can't do it. And just a quick word there. We talk about mental health and well-being. It's actually well-being. Mental health being an element of that, in my humble opinion. And there's a quick definition. If you look, if you Google well-being, it comes up with all sorts of strange conclusions. But that you do not need to be ill to have your performance affected. It's worth remembering that. We do it with fatigue. We recognise it with fatigue. We don't necessarily recognise it with life stresses. So, peer support, important. Leadership within the peer support system, but particularly from management. You have to be able to guide, manage, help. We live in a blame society, and trying to apply just culture in that is quite difficult. And now we're talking about things like mental health, where if Joe Public decides that his pilot has got a screw loose, or whatever non-technical term you want to use, he's not going to be too happy. There's a good question. Do we value people or do we price them? There are a number of operators out there who price them, not value them. And you heard from Virgin a very sensible attitude that says, this department is an investment, because we have the safest and best engineered aeroplane in the world. If you put somebody that's sick in the front of it. HR policies have got to be industry related. So where you have companies, as we've seen recently, where sickness absence, the old Bradford scale nonsense, is being used to select people for redundancy, again, the pressure is on people to fly. Crazy, but that's what we do. And the Bradford scale, of course, set up for normal industries, industrial settings, town council type settings, where people come to work, they come to work, they actually got a cold, so they're not fit. So for us, you get a cold, you're on the wrong side of this. We need to fix that. But you do have to know your people. You mentioned that. It's hugely important. And that's not just from the management level, that is from the interpersonal bit. So there's a mentoring issue there. We don't tend to have people appointed as managers, having trained them, we just appoint them typically. And so well done, you're now a training captain. Some operators do, some don't, otherwise they go, well done, you're off. So there's no leadership there. And then rostering. Rostering needs to change. Rostering has to start having, if you're going to have these support systems and you're going to have perhaps a captain who, as part of his training to become a management pilot, is there, you're going to look after these group of 10 first officers. You're going to fly with them every 2 weeks or whatever it happens to be. You're going to fly with that group as opposed to anybody that happens to turn up. So there's a change, I believe, a change to rostering system that's required. You have to train the people who are involved in this. You mentioned it, Malcolm, in terms of people involved in the peer support system generally. There is a cost that comes with that, of course. Endangered species, those of you who know that, just to make the point that these guys do commercial air transport as well. Let's not forget them. What about these people? They're part of your crews. So our focus at the moment is on pilot health, pilot well-being, but I would suggest to you that these people are as important. What about these? Okay. One of the first things, I was taught two things when I joined the Air Force. One, tie your China graph onto your flying suit, and the other was one day air traffic will try and kill you. So it'd be nice to think that they were also involved. And these guys? No, the BA Cowlings incident, fatigue, pressures, they're not immune from it. Nor are these. One of the biggest sources of costs for operators is ground damage. And yet, not only are these people unregulated, they're sort of largely unsupervised, and yet they have the same problems as the rest of us, without any of the support mechanisms. And just a reminder of that. yes, should we be worried about it to the extent that we perhaps are? Probably not. But what is important is that these support systems work, and they work effectively, because without them, we damp down the whole efficiency of the system. So it's an investment, and you can't afford to throw it away by having people go sick, where early intervention would help fix. That's me. Thank you.
I'm happy to take questions now or later. I'd like to make a couple of interesting observations, but it was a very interesting presentation. I think for me one of the key things was a throwaway line almost you used, which was, what's the incident rate? Who knows? I have heard it expressed, and I read it while preparing this conference. Somebody said, aircrew don't suffer from mental health problems because they're specially selected. DISEX Air Force, I did a lot of consulting with the Air Force and its business partners of mine with fast jet pilots, and they have an expression, GD wow, general duties, walk on water. General duties are the fast jet boys, you know, the Red Arrows and the like, and they had a view that they could walk on water. They were the elite, and as such, the things that affect the common man and woman don't affect us. They were immune to mental health problems in their own minds. This is a very interesting view psychologically and entirely unsupportable. So there is this issue of what is the base rate. In any other aspect of aviation, we would look to see what is the base rate of incidents. In this area, we have no real insight. A study in Brazil in 2012, the Brazilian Aviation Authority, looked quite rigorously at pilot time rates. They took 870 pilots working on short-haul routes. Short-haul routes impose their own stresses. Long-haul is duty cycles, time shifts. Short-haul is duty frequency. You know, in and out of Edinburgh 4 times a day on a quick turnaround is hard work. Of the 807 pilots that they assessed, they found an incident rate of 23.7% suffering from common mental disorders. And that's stress, anxiety and depression, 23.7%. And the recommendation of that study was that the Brazilian Aviation Authority needed to make aircrew mental health a priority issue. As far as I can tell, that is the only study that I could recognise that would meet standards of acceptable rigour. But if that study is in any way valid and representative, the problem may be larger than we think. So one of the key things, which I think Di touched on, this question of who knows what the base rate is a huge problem that needs addressing. Unless we know the size of the problem, we don't know how we might look to address it. Your point on crew rostering, later John Roller's going to talk about the Air Force. We were chatting earlier on. In the Air Force, on the squadron, it's family. You know everybody intimately. You probably know if they've had a marital, because you could hear the argument if their kitchen window and your kitchen window are open. Entirely different culture, and a different solution would result. So in the civil world, we have to acknowledge that change. Common mental disorders themselves may not necessarily be disqualifying events. CMDs, in and of themselves, don't cause problems for piloting necessarily. What the evidence would suggest is that they cause degradation in judgment and decision making, interpersonal communication, and attentional focus. Now, if there is a clear linkage between a common mental disorder and those 3 attributes, I would argue that those 3 attributes are the real problem when flying an aircraft. A personal side, I was doing a week's training last week to re-qualify. By the Wednesday, my wife was in hospital, son's doing his GCSEs, and the cylinder head blew up on my car on Monday. By the Wednesday afternoon, final flight, my instructor said, last flight of the day, coming off the base leg, I have control, and landed the aeroplane. He said, you probably would have landed it, but your brain was not in that aircraft. I signed myself off the rest of that week's course because he was right. My mind was not with the aeroplane, and I was beginning to make stupid mistakes. This is the problem for common mental disorders, and without a base rate, then we have an issue.
Just to prove the business about fast jet aircrew, one of my friends, his last trip in a fast jet was in Spain. He had been traumatised the year before by arguably indiscipline, inverted over the top of the hill at sort of about this height, where he assumed his life was over, and he started to get anxiety attacks. And he was flying in Spain, and eventually said to his pilot, "I've just seen a 100-foot bull take me home." And the pilot said, "Hold it a moment." And he went round in a big loop. He said, "What, you mean this 100-foot bull?" And there was a big sign, a big billboard, 100 feet high with a bull, because it was Spain. Which was very amusing, but he said to him, "Yeah, I accept that." He said, "But I thought that was real. Take me home." Yeah. And he went back to flying as well.
I see one of the things in both presentations that I find missing, and that is ESMOG. And this whole area about electromagnetic interference in the cockpit, outside of the cockpit, on your mobile phones, I believe is one of the areas where you have this judgment problem, is one of the areas where you have low vitality at the cell level, which is leading to fatigue. And so when we did our test, because we have products to counter that radiation, what we found, and we did an arbitrary number, was that if you fly over 4 hours, your judgment is equivalent to you having 2 drinks. So when you get to 10 to 12 hours, you're down to 3 drinks in reaction, in determining what reactions you should be having from the aircraft. And I think both of you has got a major problem with that area. And it's outside the medical mainstream, if you like. It's way outside the law. And to come back to the Brazilian thing, we did go to the Airline Pilots Association in Cape Town, and Brazil was the only one that wanted to follow up on this. And then they ran into trouble where they talked to the lawyers. So the law and the legal side is a big challenge for you.
You mentioned fatigue there, which is another area that we might look into. Do you think it's acceptable that there are only 2 operators in Europe who have a validated fatigue risk management system, when certainly we know, and the 3 things that you put down to the common mental disorders, we also know fatigue does exactly the same things. And we are getting reduced by numbers again, reducing the number of courses, more and more to be done by European people. I personally fatigue is a huge area that again is ignored massively. It's given a lot of lip service. When it comes to putting it into practice, it's difficult. I just wonder what you think the acceptable level of fatigue risk management systems should be in the Western world.
I think it depends whether you have a need for a specific fatigue risk management system or whether you manage fatigue through other means. But subjectively, when I go around and I talk to people in the industry, they're tired. As a general rule.
That's a very good point. The legally too is you're not allowed in the FRM transition to have an FRM as you previously had an approved FRM, and therefore there's supply agents until you go through a qualifying period. So I think if you're saying that in 2 years' time, you have a valid point. At the moment, we're in a flux where most people are frozen in their previous dispensations under the AOC. So I don't think it's quite a family thing, albeit in 2 or 3 years' time, if we're still in that situation and we're surprised about, we have got a problem.
Thank you very much. And it's still early days for the asset system.
Just like one final observation that I mentioned. You mentioned the word management. I There are a number of people here today, we're fortunate, Katie Dodsworth, Forbes, a couple of people who can speak to this. In a previous life, I did organisational stress management. The major cause of stress in organisations tends to be your line manager. Most of them are inadequately, sorry, Virgin Team are laughing to you. Most people who are put in a line management position are not given either the appropriate training or the culture that they exist in does not allow them the latitude to deploy appropriate levels of common sense because there are legal or HR policies that preclude that. So when we talk about fatigue, we talk about stress, we talk about common mental disorders, we cannot discount the role of line management because that is generally where people report the problem coming from, particularly in exit interviews. Why are you leaving? My manager, I can't cope with her or him. Complete nightmare. So I think Di's presentation has raised some really crucial issues that we as an industry need to get to grips with. So thank you very much, Di.